everybody. Welcome back to the Skeleton Crew. I'm your host, Jen Callahan, and today I have a great guest with me. Her name is Jennifer Clayton. She is joining me from Oregon. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All
Yep.
right. So
Mhm.
Jennifer Clayton, she's currently right now the director for the Diagnostic Imaging Program at a local community college in Oregon called Linn-Benton. And she comes with us with 14 years experience as a leader and an educator, working as a technologist still, I believe, and we'll get into that, but also too in the education realm. So we're kind of just going to delve into everything with Jennifer in terms of her currently being the program director, and then we'll touch on, the way that education has changed over the past 10 or so years. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Jennifer, thank you for being with me.
Thanks so much for having me on your show, Jen. This is really exciting.
Yeah. So let's start off with the education portion. Maybe just explain to me, how did you transition from being a technologist into getting into education?
Yeah, well, just kind of a funny story. I graduated from the program that I teach for now. I think I had graduated for probably about 6 or 7 years and had the opportunity to manage the department that I work for. So I was kind of doing the department manager thing and then splitting my time between, being a working manager, doing X-ray and CT. And
Mhm.
one day I got an email from my former program director, and she said, "Hey, I'm staying with the college, but I'm moving on to something different. Would you be interested in this position?" And I was kind of like, is this a prank? What's going on? Because I had no education experience. I'd
Mhm.
always kind of worked with students clinically, hands on, but I just loved the program. Being part of the program really changed, my life. My kids were real little when I went through the program. So it impacted my family, just a really positive experience. And so when they asked the question, kind of despite my worries or what I felt at the time was like my lack of qualifications, I just kind of sat with it and thought, man, that would be such a cool process to be a part of. And so I said yes. I went through the interview process, and that was 10 years ago, which is crazy how fast it goes by.
I know. I can't even believe that right now we're in the month of April. It's like complete sidebar, but I was telling my kids today that today's April 9th. I'm like, oh my God, didn't April just happen?
Yeah,
But
where we
so, I
go?
mean, to your point, time just flies and you don't even realize it. So when you started with the community college, you obviously didn't jump right into program director, I assume.
Actually did,
Did
which
you really? Oh, wow. I wasn't sure of your journey through, and I wasn't sure if you had started as like clinical coordinator or like adjunct professor. But wow, that's like a huge shift from going from technologist working in the clinical field to then being in charge of all these students and the curriculum and stuff. Wow. So kudos to you. That's a big feat.
we joke about it now, the faculty and I, because it is like on the outside looking in. I'm like, it was almost better that I didn't know, any different because I just kind of dove in head first. I also only had my associate's degree at the time. So while I'm learning to teach, I'm also going back to school to get my advanced degree. So looking back, it does seem wild, but I learned so much and I really had great mentors. I taught with people that were also x-ray techs, but they had a degree in education. And so they really helped me to fill the gaps and help bring me up to speed pretty
Okay.
quickly. But yeah, it's kind of wild when I think back to it because the administrator role is heavy and then learning to teach is real heavy, but I learned a lot along the way.
So the education requirement to be, a director of a program, I know that for you to be clinical coordinator or possibly be a professor in radiography, it's just required to have, I think, is it 1 or 2 years clinical experience and then any type of degree. Doesn't necessarily have to be within radiography, but I'm assuming, like you said, for administrative purposes, is there another degree that's required?
Yeah, you do need to have your master's to be a program director. But at the time, as long as I was enrolled and working towards that goal, and there was a time limit for me to achieve that, okay, and completing that role. So, yeah,
What's the master's in?
my master's is actually in business. And a lot of people ask me, like, well, why did you go into business? And when I stepped into this role, the program was what we call cost recovery. So it was like a small business. We didn't get funds from the college general funds.
Okay.
We really just only functioned off of our tuition dollars. So I had to manage the program, faculty, salaries, equipment, all of that stuff. based on our revenue, and I'd have to market the program, right? To get
Wow.
the word out, to get students. And I actually learned a lot with that business degree and also, leadership principles associated with that too.
Yeah. Is the program still currently like that? How you say like you're functioning just off of the tuition dollars?
It's not. It's been absorbed by the college. If you start making revenue, it's helpful for the college to have that too.
Are there many programs that were like that or currently like that?
There weren't a lot. I think when we were doing it, it was diagnostic imaging and occupational therapy. And I think we've both kind of been absorbed by the college. Now phlebotomy, I think, is the standalone one. And
Yeah.
from the college perspective, it's kind of their way to launch a program and see its viability
Okay.
kind of on its own, see if it can stand alone on its own. So it doesn't happen very often, but it's an interesting model. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that is an interesting model, but it kind of makes sense. They want to make sure that the program that they're putting together, before I guess they sink a whole lot of money into possibly putting a lab together, energized lab, or the faculty and staff to make sure that it's actually, like you said, viable and worth. But I feel like the healthcare field is growing so rapidly that it makes sense.
Yeah, and especially in imaging, our equipment is crazy expensive. And it's hard for the college to, like, administrators in the college to have an appreciation for that because they're not in healthcare. So they're like, how that X-ray equipment costs how much?
Even if you can get second refurbished tubes and buckies, like sometimes it's the imaging detectors that, are really costly. So since you moved into this spot as director, have you implemented a good amount of changes or, maybe coming from the other professors in terms of like changing curriculum or anything over the past 10 years? Has it evolved a good bit?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I feel like imaging, we kind of grow in dog years, right? So 10 years really feels like, 30. And there's so many changes happening in our field that we just have to adapt a lot from the educational standpoint to help students get up to speed quicker. When I took on the role, man, I had a big case of imposter syndrome because the person that I was replacing was so amazing. She was really a pioneer in the field, and kind of that pressure of, am I going to fill this role and keep the program reputation going? So managing that and then also trying to kind of infuse my own ideas. And so I think the great thing about time is it gives you that confidence to try different things. Yeah, we've done a lot. I think a big priority for us is focusing on the professionalism piece with our students. So prioritizing that as much as the technical piece, just knowing they're going to serve patients, and I want them to be good colleagues
Mhm.
for techs that are working out there too. So we really kind of prioritize that along with adapting to getting through things like film and shielding changes and all those things.
I think the professional aspect is a good thing to focus on. I feel like it's almost something that should be incorporated honestly within like high school's curriculums. I can't tell you, this might sound completely sidebar, not related, but I think that it is. You have a patient who's coming in, like for me, I'm always like, hi, my name is Jen. We're going to be doing X, Y, and Z. I always tell them what I'm doing while they're doing it. Like, I'm just going to feel down here around your pelvis to make sure that they feel comfortable. But I think that introducing yourself is an important thing, it's the human thing, to be honest, that you're have some type of relationship with this person that you're going to be spending the next 5 to possibly 25 minutes with. Again, might not seem related at all, but personally, I can't stand at this point. I go into a supermarket and a cashier doesn't even acknowledge that I'm standing in their line. You know what I mean? So I
I
go.
think it's Yeah, I think it's completely related because patients don't like surprises. And so explaining what you're doing, even the why is sometimes behind what you're doing, it kind of bridges that awkward silence because patients, I think we take it for granted. First of all, patients don't want to be there, but they have no sense of the expectation of how the exam's going to go. And so when we're directing them through communication, it actually makes them feel calm and
Mhm.
settled because they know what to expect. They know kind of what to anticipate. So I really think that it's related, that communication piece.
Yes, and the introduction thing, I feel like if anything, tell them your name. You know what I mean?
Yes.
You're asking what their name is, what their birthday is, at least provide them with your name and that you're gonna be doing their study.
Yeah, and just showing some enthusiasm for meeting them
Mhm.
where they are, like recognizing that they're coming to see you today and that you're happy to help them during this time.
So with your program, like you said, so many things have changed within the field. Do you guys have Energized Lab within your department? And
We do.
did that have to change from, say, I guess like 10 years ago, it was still kind of CR, right? I think we were still functioning off of CR, and then somewhere around like I feel like 2020 DR really, I mean like DR was in the field, but I think it was mandated at some point that facilities operating with X-ray equipment had to have DR. So did you guys have to do that transition as well?
We did, and it was tough. We actually were fortunate to get a new lab in 2017, and that was right at that time where we were asking ourselves, do we want to just kind of discontinue CR because that's where things were going, based on those reimbursement rates. So initially, we have all digital equipment. So we have two energized rooms, and then we also have a couple portables, and then we have non-energized units where the students just practice positioning with each other. And so for the non-energized units, we did have like CR cassettes because they could put them in the bucky and kind of go through that process. But I mean, anymore, detectors are that one size fits all. So even like having them go through the process of changing the CR cassettes is becoming obsolete.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah, that's not even out there. So at this point, we're just primarily digital, but we also have to teach the components still because it's on the test of the
Mhm.
CR reader, the IP plate, everything associated with that, which is challenging, right? Because if they don't see it in practice, it's really hard to know or understand the whys behind like the physics of it.
Right. Here's a question for you, and this honestly just popped into my head as we were talking about like changing out cassettes. So at this point, I've graduated 12 years ago. I graduated in 2012 from my radiography program, and I remember within the Merrill's textbook that when you were learning the body part, you were also too learning the size cassette that you're supposed to be using, right? So for instance, a hand or a foot, you were using an 8 by 10 cassette. Is that information still in the Merrill's textbooks? I haven't looked at a Merrill's textbook probably since I graduated. Sometimes every now and then might refer to it in my department if I need to, but I'm not looking at what's in there. And honestly, they're probably like 10-year-old books at this point anyway, you know?
Yeah, they do talk about your IR or your field size, and I think that's probably where the shift is gonna happen. I think it's probably they're just gonna drop the IR size, and it will be mainly driven by field size to just indicate your collimation field. But yeah, it's crazy how our terminology shifts, and then textbooks take a long time to author and build and create, and so
Mhm.
that's what is really tricky about teaching is technology is increasing so quickly, it's outpacing the resources that we can use, like those textbooks. So there's just a lot of supplemental that we've got to create kind of on our own to help, bridge that gap.
Right. Because at this point, I mean, if you're working with DR, you're working with a 14 by 17 cassette or imaging receptor all the time. Like you said, you're just looking at field size, how large is your light field?
Yeah, or a 17 by 17. A lot of
Right.
them is going to 17 by 17 too.
Mhm.
And that's challenging because, we're big advocates for collimation, and it makes it very easy to just open up that light field if you've got a detector that size.
This episode is brought to you by xraytech.org, the RadTech career resource. If you're considering a career in radiology, check out xraytech.org to get honest information on schools, degree options, career paths, and salaries. With the challenges of like technology always changing, what other challenges do you feel like you encounter or your students encounter within the program or maybe going out into the clinical sites?
I think that, the program is tough. And I think that it's been even more challenging post COVID in the clinical environment because those poor techs out there, their staffing shortages, they just don't have the same bandwidth as they
Mhm.
used to. So students have to get up to speed a lot quicker. And
Right.
I think that that's been a challenge. I think students take for granted that they're actually in a hospital facility and the hospital is pretty vulnerable. Patient doesn't associate a student with the school. They associate them with whatever, hospital organization. So they're having students come in and practice with their patients. And when they're just running around trying to do their best, keep their head above water, it can be really challenging right now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and like you said, technologists that are there, they want to help, they want to teach. Well, some do. I feel like some days you just don't have it in you to have that, like you said, bandwidth that you're there to do your work and you just don't have the capacity for an extra question coming from someone. So it's challenging. The students that are coming out now, do you find or have you received feedback from them in terms of job field, like easy to pick up a position or are they having challenges in that realm at all?
I'll speak for our area in Oregon. They can pretty much go anywhere they want to for work. And, historically, when we would graduate, you'd have to work like probably 3 or 4 years before cross modality
Hmm.
training became available. And now they've already got offers before they graduate to go to the cath lab, to go into MRI, to go into CT. And so that's been really an interesting shift for us as educators because there is this dynamic of you're going through x-ray school and the techs are sharing their skill set with you. And so it can be real off-putting to techs if you're treating x-ray like a stepping stone to get
Right.
into an advanced modality. But you also can't fault students for wanting to increase their practice skills either. So it's this kind of tricky dynamic to coach them through those kind of, difficult dynamics. And also for us to respond, as educators to it as well, because back in the day, you would just take whatever per diem shifts you could until something full time came open. And now there's perhaps sign on bonuses, their
Right.
day shift right out of the gate. And it's just a whole different world. And I think while it's really great for students, kind of the shadow side of that is they don't work those off shifts where they're kind of like have to be on their own, where they have to continue building that critical thinking process
Hmm.
because it is like a skeleton crew, right?
Right.
Where
Yep.
you have to do more, individually to keep the team going. So I think that there is kind of that downside is that they don't spend that time in general x-ray where you're always adapting to the patient more, which is different than the advanced modalities where maybe the patient is in one position and then you're acquiring your scans in a different way. So
Yeah, I think X-ray definitely requires a lot of critical thinking, especially if you're working in a hospital, I should say. I did want to go back to you were talking about in Oregon and like coming out and the positions that are available. And I was on the website earlier for the school and it showed what the median salary is for a technologist in the state of Oregon. And it said $85,000. And I thought to myself, like, wow, that seems really high. And then I clicked over and then it said like nationally and it went down to like 66. And I feel like that sounds a little bit more what I was thinking, but is the pay, I guess, great that high in the state of Oregon for technologists?
yeah, it's a pretty respectable wage. I think a lot of our students, we just had a group that graduated last month, and a lot of them, their starting wage is between maybe 28 and $30 an hour. And then as they move into the advanced modalities, then their wages just keep going up from there. So yeah, it's a pretty good return of investment on their
Okay.
education.
Yeah, I mean, definitely as you proceed on from being an X-ray, the other modalities obviously definitely do pay more, but I wasn't sure if that was just for coming out as like a rad tech. Obviously not for first years or, for new grads, but I just was surprised by that number, but I mean, it makes sense now that you say with the additional modalities. So let's talk about you though real fast. I mean, besides just the program, you're still a practicing technologist?
I still do CT. I work for the same group that I trained with as a student. So actually,
Oh,
it's been almost 18 years and they're
wow.
so great. They just let me kind of pop in per diem when I can pick shifts up over break or just maybe once a month to keep my skill set sharp. And I still just love interacting and meeting with patients. And they're kind of like a second family to me too. So it's just a great crew. And yeah, so I've been doing that for about 18 years. I just discovered we were crunching the numbers when I worked last couple of weeks ago, and I'm like, oh man, that's crazy how fast time goes by.
Yeah. I'm sure sometimes like have to work a weekend shift because you work Monday through Friday, you have 40 hours, probably more than that since you're a program director. You might dread doing it, but then once you get there, you're like, oh, I like this. Sometimes it's just a nice change of scenery for a different type of work. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And, I always joke with the people that I work with, like, you're probably getting maybe 50, 75% of a tech when I'm here. Right? Like, I'm not going to be as efficient. It'll take me a little bit to get up to speed, but I just love it. I love connecting with the patients. And especially in CT, we're seeing a lot of cancer patients, a lot of people that are real sick. And
Yeah.
just to be able to kind of be that moment to help them feel calm through the exam and just connect with them, I really enjoyed that piece.
Yeah, I enjoy that portion of patient interaction, having conversations with them. And people would say, "Why didn't you become a nurse?" And I'm like, "Well, because I do like interacting with patients and I do like caring for them, but our time ends at some point."
I was listening to one of your other podcasts and you talked about how it's is a good field for introverts. And when I talk about the program, I note that all the time because, if you have a Krabby Cakes, you're only with them for 15 or 20 minutes. There isn't anything that you kind of can't get through. And then if you have an exam that just didn't go well, you have a brand new fresh start. Like the next patient has no idea what
Mhm.
happened with that last patient. And I think that that's something that's really cool about our field is we get to begin again with
Right.
every new patient.
Right. And it's not going to be the same thing most likely. I mean, chest x-rays are basically like your bread and butter for x-ray. But, you might have a scapula walk through the door and you might be like, "Yeah, this is exciting. I haven't done a scapula in like a month."
Yeah, or you pull up that chest X-ray and they're 97 and you're like, "Oh," in your mind, you're like, "Oh man, what is this gonna look like?" And they just come in dancing their way into the X-ray room. And
Yeah.
you're just like, "Where did this little thing come from?"
Oh yeah.
You just have no idea.
Oh yeah. I have to say, some 100-year-old patients that I've come across in the past couple of years, I'm like, "Why do you seem like you're 70? That's great. Please tell me what your secrets are. Like, I need to know."
Right, you're moving better than I am. What's
Yeah.
going on?
So, do you have moving forward with the program for the future, like what do you see in terms of changes, or I guess maybe I should say goals do you have for the program going forward?
I wish we could take every student that comes in, and we talk about this a lot in the program because there's so many shortages right now. We're really feeling a lot of pressure to take more students, but it also is this fine balance of quality over quantity.
Mhm.
Meaning we have an obligation to the students that start with us to make sure that they have the attention and that their needs are met to be successful. So it's kind of always having those conversations about how can we help address the shortages by taking on more students, but then how do we also serve the ones that we have so that they reach their goals in terms of like program goals. I wanted to continue on to this idea that we're building the next generation of leaders. That's something that's really important in our program is that the X-ray students see themselves as somebody that can contribute something right out of the gate, even as a student. And so they start seeing themselves as advocates and being in these roles because otherwise we have people making the decisions for us. And so that's something that's really important to me. I'd like to continue to see how we can involve students in those advocacy efforts through the program.
So, it seems like you've really enjoyed the progression of your career going from technologist and you still do practice, which is great. And then, the way that you've transitioned into education, that you're pretty passionate about it. What is it about education that you feel so not groundbreaking or earth shattering, but it just, warms your heart? What would you suggest to people that are possibly thinking that maybe they no longer want to work in the clinical field and have been toying with the idea of getting into education?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question because obviously the biggest barrier is the wage, especially with the job market. Wages are really high right now, and educators aren't going to make as much compared to being a working technologist out in the field. But what I love about being an educator is that I'm part of somebody's bigger story. And really, all I'm doing is just sharing what I know, what I've learned, what my experience has been, and helping them to develop their own skill set and just being that person that sees something in them that they don't yet see in themselves and to
Mhm.
kind of help coach them in all different facets, not just teaching them how is an x-ray photon produced, but also being there when they're like, Jen, I am struggling. I don't feel like I'm a good enough student. I don't feel like I'm a good enough mom, right? I don't feel like I'm a good enough partner. When the students are being pulled in all of these directions, just reminding them that they can do it and that they just keep putting one foot in front of the other, that there's this amazing profession waiting for them. And in terms of like what it does for my heart is it just makes me feel so proud to be involved in that part of their journey and just be that person that my instructors were for me to help me through the tough times, whether it's with academics or just clinically a tough day. It's real rewarding to be part of that process.
It's great to see someone basically go from nothing to 100. You know what I mean?
And so quickly.
Right. I know. I mean, because some of these programs out there are only 1 year, and that baffles my mind. I went through a 2 year program and I felt like 2 years wasn't even enough. Just
Right.
because
Yeah.
it's so much information, I can't even imagine digesting all of that in 1 year. But yes, 2 years, again, when talking about time seems like really long, but 2 years really is not that long.
Yeah, and then you go on to see where the students take their education. I mean, they'll go into different modalities or they'll go into leadership and you stay connected with these folks. They'll tell you when they're getting married or when they're having a family, and being part of that long lasting connection is definitely a big bonus to doing this work.
Mhm. Do you find that the different educators that you have worked with, do they kind of come into the field as progress from being in the clinical role and then going into education and then kind of just stay in education and maybe do what you do, where here or there they might do clinical work? But do you find that they mostly, like, maybe it's the last portion of their career? Not to say the last portion because someone's old, but you know what I mean? Like they transition to there and that's kind of where they stay.
Yeah, I think that that sounds true when I think about the folks that I work with. And we collaborate with a lot of the other programs in Oregon too. So it's kind of nice to tap into like what's their experience. And I feel once folks go into education, they'll typically stay there. And
Mhm.
they might, continue to do per diem work, but it just seems like a good spot long term to land in.
Thank you so much for taking the time with me this afternoon or the morning. It's in Oregon, it's in the morning there. I'm in the afternoon. But I do appreciate your time today. I really enjoyed our conversation about the progression of technology with students moving from when we were in our clinical setting to now, and to think of education as a good transition point if you're looking to move on from being in a clinical role, which helps me personally. I was sharing with Jennifer that I feel like I'm kind of in this spot where I need to do something that I really enjoy working clinical work, but there's something else I feel like there's in me that I need to do. So we were having a conversation before I started to recording that it's a good transition point. It's a good idea to look at. So thank you, Jennifer, so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was really a privilege to be able to share this time with you today, and I appreciate the invitation.
Oh, my pleasure. Everybody, Jennifer Clayton meeting with us from Linn-Benton Community College. I'm Jen Callahan, and I will see you guys next week. You've been watching The Skeleton Crew, brought to you by xraytech.org. On the next episode, join us to explore the present and the future of the rad tech career in the field of radiology.